You can tell a lot about a person by what they pay attention to. Some people notice opportunities. Some people notice danger. Some people notice attraction. And some people spend so much of their life watching other people's reactions that they forget what it's like to simply exist without monitoring the room. The strange thing is that most people never realize they're doing it. They think they're just observant, good with people, emotionally intelligent, socially aware. But sometimes what looks like emotional intelligence is actually emotional survival. And for many bisexual people, that survival strategy starts much earlier than anyone realizes. Long before the labels, long before coming out, long before relationships, it often begins with a feeling that something about you is different, not wrong, not broken, just different. And different children learn very quickly that different people get watched more closely, so they start watching back. That's the part nobody talks about. People think the hardest part of being bisexual is figuring out who you're attracted to. For many people, it isn't. The hardest part is figuring out what everyone else is going to do with that information. Because bisexuality exists in a strange psychological territory. A territory filled with uncertainty. You are told visibility matters, then punished for being visible. You are told honesty matters, then treated differently when you're honest. You are told to be yourself, then immediately questioned when you are. That creates a very specific kind of emotional wound. Not a dramatic wound. Not the kind people immediately recognize. A quieter wound. A wound that teaches a person to study reactions before revealing themselves. And over time that habit becomes automatic. You stop entering rooms. You start scanning them. You stop meeting people. You start assessing them. You stop asking whether someone likes you. You start asking whether they would still like you if they knew everything. That question follows people for years, sometimes decades. And eventually it changes how the brain operates. Because uncertainty is exhausting. The human mind hates uncertainty. It wants patterns, predictions, control. So it adapts. It starts looking for clues, micro-expressions, body language, voice changes, awkward pauses, the slight hesitation before someone responds, the look that lasts 1 second too long, the smile that suddenly feels different. And after enough repetition, something remarkable happens. The person becomes incredibly good at reading people, almost frighteningly good. Friends call them intuitive, perceptive, empathetic, emotionally intelligent. What nobody sees is the anxiety underneath the skill. Because there is a difference between understanding people and monitoring them. One comes from curiosity. The other comes from fear. Many bisexual people spend years trapped between those two experiences, especially when they've repeatedly encountered the same painful pattern. The pattern of being understood until they're fully understood. Think about that for a moment. Understood until they're fully understood. People often love complexity in theory. Until that complexity becomes real. Until it belongs to someone sitting directly in front of them. Then suddenly questions appear. Doubts appear. Assumptions appear. And the person learns a devastating lesson. Being known does not always create safety. Sometimes being known creates risk. That changes people. Quietly. Because once your nervous system learns that acceptance can disappear unexpectedly, you become obsessed with predicting when it might happen again. The brain becomes a surveillance system, constantly running in the background, watching, listening, calculating, not because you want to, because your body believes it's protecting you. And the terrifying part is that it often works. You detect judgment before anyone says anything. You detect discomfort before anyone admits it. You detect emotional withdrawal before it becomes obvious. The predictions become accurate. Very accurate. Accurate enough that you start trusting the monitoring more than your own feelings. That's where the real damage begins. Because eventually the focus shifts entirely outward. You become an expert on everyone else's emotional state. Meanwhile, your own emotional state becomes harder and harder to identify. You know when somebody else feels uncomfortable. You know when somebody else feels distant. You know when somebody else feels defensive. But ask yourself how you feel, and suddenly the answer isn't clear. Because you've spent years studying everyone except yourself. Many bisexual people know exactly what this feels like. Especially those who grew up feeling psychologically suspended between categories. Too much for one group, not enough for another. Accepted conditionally, questioned constantly, expected to explain themselves repeatedly. The explanations become exhausting. So eventually a person stops trying to explain. Instead they start adapting, shape-shifting, editing, monitoring, predicting, becoming whoever creates the least resistance. And that's another trauma nobody talks about. The trauma of becoming emotionally adjustable. Because emotional adjustment gets rewarded. People like easy. People like predictable. People like identities that fit neatly into categories. But some experiences don't fit neatly anywhere. And living inside that reality creates a chronic state of self-monitoring. A person starts asking invisible questions every day. Should I mention that? Should I hide that? Should I explain that? Should I clarify that? Should I prepare for their reaction first? Eventually those questions become permanent background noise. Always present. Always running. Always consuming energy. That's why so many people become exhausted without understanding why. They're not tired from the conversation itself. They're tired from the calculations happening underneath it. The emotional math. The constant forecasting. The endless prediction. Because every interaction becomes a risk assessment. Every new friendship becomes a risk assessment. Every date becomes a risk assessment. Every family gathering becomes a risk assessment. Every workplace conversation becomes a risk assessment. The room is never just a room. It's data, potential outcomes, possible reactions, hidden variables. And carrying that level of awareness for years changes how someone experiences intimacy. Because intimacy requires uncertainty. It requires vulnerability. It requires allowing another person to surprise you. But people who have spent years protecting themselves from surprise often struggle to relax into connection. Even when the relationship is healthy. Even when the person is trustworthy. The monitoring continues. The scanning continues. The nervous system never receives the memo that the danger is over. So it keeps working. Every delayed text message becomes a mystery. Every change in tone becomes evidence. Every pause becomes information. Every silence becomes a puzzle. Not because the person is dramatic. Because the person has been conditioned to believe reactions matter. And many times they did. That's what makes this experience so difficult. The fear isn't irrational. It's learned. There's a difference. People often talk about trauma as if it's always one terrible event. One catastrophe. One unforgettable moment. But many emotional wounds are built differently. They are built through repetition, through hundreds of small experiences, small misunderstandings, small invalidations, small moments of feeling unseen, small moments of feeling questioned, small moments of realizing people understand the label more than they understand you. None of those moments seem devastating individually. Together they become a psychological environment. And environments shape people. Eventually a person starts preparing for misunderstanding before misunderstanding even happens. That preparation feels responsible, mature, safe, until one day they realize something disturbing. They don't remember what it feels like to stop preparing, to simply exist. Without editing, without monitoring, without calculating, without managing perception. That's when the exhaustion becomes visible, because hypervigilance always collects a debt. The mind can only remain alert for so long before it starts breaking down. And modern culture makes the problem even worse, because now reactions are everywhere. Social media transformed reactions into a measurable resource. Likes, comments, views, shares, engagement, approval, disapproval. Algorithms turned human reaction into a scoreboard. For someone already conditioned to monitor people, this environment becomes psychologically addictive. Every notification becomes information. Every interaction becomes feedback. Every silence becomes data. People become hypervisible and emotionally invisible at the same time. That's one of the darkest contradictions of modern life. People know more about each other than ever, yet feel less understood than ever. Especially people who already spent years feeling psychologically misunderstood. Because visibility and understanding are not the same thing. Attention and acceptance are not the same thing. Being desired and being understood are not the same thing. A person can receive enormous amounts of attention and still feel profoundly unseen. And many bisexual people know exactly what that feels like. Because the deepest wound isn't usually rejection. It's reduction. Being reduced to assumptions. Reduced to stereotypes. Reduced to explanations. Reduced to categories. Reduced to narratives written by other people. That creates a very specific loneliness. The loneliness of being interpreted. People think loneliness means being alone. Sometimes loneliness means being surrounded by people who only understand parts of you. That kind of loneliness changes the way someone moves through the world. They become cautious, observant, adaptive, protective, and eventually they become experts at reading reactions. Not because they wanted a special skill, because the skill became necessary. Necessary for belonging, necessary for safety, necessary for survival. At least that's what the nervous system believes. But survival skills create strange problems. Because eventually the skill continues even when the threat disappears. The person keeps scanning, keeps monitoring, keeps predicting, keeps preparing. Even when nobody is attacking them. Even when nobody is judging them. Even when nobody is leaving. And that's when the survival mechanism becomes a prison. The same ability that once protected them starts exhausting them. The same awareness that once kept them safe starts keeping them anxious. The same observation that once prevented pain starts preventing peace. Because peace requires something terrifying. Trust. Trusting that not every pause means rejection. Trusting that not every silence means abandonment. Trusting that not every reaction needs to be analyzed. Trusting that not every room needs to be scanned. trusting that not every person is a potential threat. For someone who spent years surviving through observation, that feels almost impossible. Yet underneath all of this is a heartbreaking truth. Most people who become experts at reading reactions were never trying to master human behavior. They were trying to avoid getting hurt. They were trying to avoid being misunderstood again. Trying to avoid explaining themselves again. Trying to avoid feeling invisible again. Trying to avoid discovering that somebody's acceptance had conditions attached to it. And maybe that's the saddest part. The skill looks impressive from the outside. People admire it, compliment it, celebrate it. They say things like, "You're amazing at reading people. You always know what everyone's thinking. You're incredibly perceptive." But sometimes those compliments are describing a wound, because hyperawareness often begins where safety ends. The person who notices everything is often carrying years of emotional uncertainty, years of invisible preparation, years of emotional self-protection, years of waiting for reactions, years of studying faces, years of searching for signs, years of trying to answer one exhausting question. Will this person still see me the same way when they see all of me? And after carrying that question long enough, a person can become extraordinarily good at reading everyone else, while quietly losing touch with themselves. That is the hidden psychological cost. The tragedy isn't becoming an expert at reading reactions. The tragedy is needing to become one in the first place.